They mistook his silence for submission, and that was their fatal error. When the HOA president slapped a fraudulent lien on the property, she didn't realize she was targeting a man who had spent 40 years auditing corporate fraud for a living. It wasn't just about a paint color anymore. It was about systematic corruption. If you appreciate stories where arrogance is systematically dismantled by the weight of the law and undeniable evidence, you've found your home here. Let's unravel the case. The envelope in the mailbox was unmistakably aggressive. It wasn't the standard white number 10 envelope used for utility bills or the glossy junk mail from local realtors. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock and with the insignia of the Oakwood Heritage Homeowners Association embossed in gold foil in the upper left corner. Elias Thorne, a man who had spent 40 years staring at spreadsheets until the numbers confessed their secrets, didn't scoff. He didn't crumble. He simply adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and slit the envelope open with the precision of a surgeon. He stood on his porch, the humid Florida morning clinging to his shirt. The neighborhood was quiet, manicured to within an inch of its life. St. Augustine grass was edged with laser straight lines. Mailboxes stood at uniform heights like soldiers on parade. It was the kind of order Elias usually appreciated, but he knew the difference between order and tyranny. He unfolded the letter. Notice of violation, 3rd degree. Unauthorized exterior modification. Window treatment. Citation, Measured OH 4492. Dear Mr. Thorne, it has come to the attention of the Architectural Control Committee, ACC, that the tinting on your front bay windows exceeds the allowable reflectivity index of 15% as stated in Article 4, Section 2.A of the Oakwood Heritage CC&Rs. As you failed to submit an ARC form prior to installation, you are hereby fined $100. This fine will recur daily until the violation is remedied. Payment due immediately. Signed, Patricia Vance, HOA President. Elias lowered the paper. He looked at his bay windows. The tint was barely noticeable, a soft charcoal hue meant to keep the brutal afternoon sun from fading his hardwood floors. More importantly, the tint had been there when he bought the house 6 months ago. The estoppel letter from the closing, the legal document confirming the house had no outstanding violations, had been clean. He heard the whine of an electric motor before he saw it. A custom-painted champagne-colored golf cart rounded the corner. Behind the wheel sat Patricia Vance. She was a woman who wore oversized sunglasses and wielded her HOA clipboard like a scepter. She slowed as she passed his driveway, her head turning just enough to acknowledge that he was holding the letter. She didn't wave. She offered a tight, predatory smile, then accelerated away, the silence of the electric motor making the interaction feel oddly ghostly. Elias walked back inside, the cool air conditioning washing over him. He went to his study, a room lined with bookshelves and a heavy mahogany desk. He didn't pick up the phone to scream at the property management company. He didn't go to the community Facebook page to rant. Instead, he opened the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet and pulled out a hanging folder labeled Closing Documents, 124 Maple Drive. He flipped through the stack until he found the estoppel certificate, signed and notarized by the very same Patricia Vance 6 months prior. It clearly stated, property is in full compliance with all association standards. He then pulled out the bound copy of the CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. He turned to Article 4. He read the clause about reflectivity. Then he went to his computer and opened a new file. He named the folder, Project Vance. Elias sat back, steepled his fingers, and looked at the letter again. Patricia assumed he was just another retiree who would cut a check for $100 to make the problem go away. She assumed he would fear the daily recurring fees. She assumed silence meant he was intimidated. She had no idea that she had just handed a forensic auditor the first thread of a very long, very expensive sweater, and Elias was about to pull it. Daily fines, Elias whispered to the empty room. That's an interesting choice, Patricia. Let's see if your ledger can support the scrutiny that invites. He reached for his keyboard. It was time to draft a response. Not an apology, but a request for discovery. The United States Postal Service receipt was a small, green slip of paper, but to Elias it was a shield. He stood at the counter of the local post office, watching the clerk stamp the date on the certified mail form. "Return receipt requested?" the clerk asked, her voice bored. "Yes," Elias replied. "I need proof of delivery to the addressee only." He wasn't sending a rant. The letter inside the envelope was a masterpiece of brevity. It simply stated that per Florida Statute 722.30851, the association was stopped, legally barred, from collecting on violations that existed prior to closing if they weren't disclosed in the estoppel certificate. He included a photocopy of the certificate Patricia herself had signed, with the no violations box clearly checked in blue ink. It was a gotcha moment, the kind that usually ended a dispute. In the corporate world, a legal department would see this, realize the error, and quietly void the fine to avoid liability. Elias drove home, expecting the matter to be resolved within the week. He spent the next 3 days tending to his rose garden, meticulously pruning the deadheads. He noticed the HOA patrol car, a white sedan with amber lights, slowing down in front of his house more frequently. They never stopped, just slowed enough to be seen. It was a psychological tactic, a low-level intimidation technique he had seen used by union busters in the 80s. On Thursday, the tracking number on his computer screen, updated, delivered, signed by P. Vance. On Friday, a courier van pulled into his driveway. This wasn't the mail carrier. This was a private process server. Elias opened the door. The man handed him a thick envelope, muttered, "Have a nice day," and left. Elias walked to the kitchen island and opened the package. He expected a letter acknowledging the error. What he found was a document on the letterhead of Vance, Miller and Associates, the HOA's retained legal counsel. Cease and desist order. Harassment of board members. Hostile communication. Mr. Thorne, your recent correspondence sent via certified mail to the private residence of the board president is considered an act of aggression and harassment under Section 9.3 of the Community Standards. Confronting board members with legal ultimatums outside of a scheduled hearing is a violation of the Civility Code. Furthermore, regarding the window tinting, the board has determined that the estoppel certificate covered only structural modifications. Window tinting is classified as aesthetic maintenance. Therefore, the violation stands. Current balance due, $450 includes administrative legal fees. You are hereby ordered to cease all direct communication with board members. All future correspondence must be directed to the association's attorney at a rate of $250 per hour billed to your homeowner account. Elias set the letter down. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. They had not only moved the goalposts, they had burned the rulebook, claiming an estoppel certificate didn't cover aesthetic maintenance. Was a lie so bold it bordered on fraud, and billing him for the lawyer they hired to threaten him? That was the cherry on top. He walked to the window. Through the offending tint, he saw Patricia Vance standing on the sidewalk across the street, talking to a landscaping crew. She pointed at a neighbor's oak tree, making a chopping motion with her hand. She looked towards Elias's house, her face impassive behind those oversized sunglasses. She thought she had boxed him in. She thought cutting off his line of communication and threatening him with legal bills would force him to pay the $450 and scrape the tint off his windows. Elias felt a cold calm settle over him. He realized this wasn't just about him. If they were doing this to a retired auditor with the time and means to fight back, what were they doing to the young families and the elderly widows in the neighborhood? He returned to his desk and opened Project Vance. He created a new subfolder, Financial Discovery. "You want to charge me legal fees for a simple letter?" Elias murmured, cracking his knuckles. "Fine, let's see what else you're spending the neighborhood's money on." He wasn't going to write to the attorney. He was going to invoke the statutory right of inspection. It was time to look at the books. The cease and desist letter sat framed in the center of Elias's desk, not as a threat, but as a focal point. Patricia. Vance wanted silence. He would give her silence. He wouldn't write her another personal letter. He wouldn't speak at the open forum. Instead, he turned to the state statutes. For the next 48 hours, Elias did not sleep much. He wasn't fretting, he was compiling. He pulled up the state's Homeowner Association Act, specifically the sections regarding official records and right of inspection. Most homeowners didn't know that the HOA wasn't a private club that could hide its books. It was a nonprofit corporation with strict fiduciary duties. He typed out a formal document. It wasn't a request, it was a demand, phrased in the ironclad language of the law. Request for inspection of official records, pursuant to State Statute 720.3035. He didn't ask for financials. That was too vague. He listed specific items, bullet-pointed for lethal clarity. 1. All general ledger detailed transaction reports from January 2019 to present. 2. Copies of all vendor contracts currently in force, specifically regarding landscaping, security, and legal representation. 3. Invoices and proof of payment, canceled checks for Greenview Landscaping Solutions for the past 24 months. 4. Board meeting minutes on open and executive session. Approving said contracts, he printed the document in triplicate. Then he wrote a personal check for $500, noting copying and retrieval deposit in the memo line. He knew their first move would be to claim that retrieving records was cost prohibitive or required a deposit. He was removing that excuse before they could even utter it. At 9:00 a.m. on Monday, Elias walked into the office of Prestige Property Management. The office was located in a bland strip mall 3 miles from the neighborhood. The carpet was industrial gray, and the air smelled of stale coffee and toner. A young receptionist looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Gary Miller," Elias said. Gary was the Community Association Manager, KM, the paid employee who supposedly advised the board. Gary emerged from a back office holding a mug that said, "World's Okayest Golfer." He was a man in his late 40s, wearing a polo shirt that was slightly too tight. He recognized Elias immediately, likely from Patricia's complaints. "Mr. Thorne," Gary sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "Look, if this is about the windows, I can't help you. The board has made their ruling. You need to talk to the attorney." "This isn't about the windows," Elias said, his voice level. He placed the folder on the counter. "This is a statutory request for records inspection. Per state law, you have 10 business days to make these records available to me." Gary picked up the document. He scanned the list, his eyebrows knitting together. "Vendor contracts? Canceled checks? Mr. Thorne, this is a fishing expedition. These are private corporate documents." "They are documents belonging to the association, of which I am a member," Elias corrected him. "And therefore, they are my documents. Privacy laws apply to personnel records and medical history, not landscaping invoices." Gary tossed the paper back on the counter. "We're busy. We're preparing for the annual budget meeting. I don't have time to dig through 5 years of archives just because you're mad about a fine." Elias reached into his pocket and placed a check for $500 on top of the request. "That covers your administrative time at the statutorily capped rate of 20 per hour," Elias said. "You have 10 business days, Gary. That puts the deadline on Friday the 24th. If the records are not made available, the statute allows for statutory damages of 50 per day for every day you are late, plus my attorney's fees to compel production." Gary stared at the check. The boredom was gone, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He looked at the specific request for Greenview Landscaping. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. I'll have to run this by the board," Gary stammered. "You do that," Elias said. "But the clock started the moment you touched that paper." Elias turned and walked out. He didn't look back, but he heard the distinct sound of Gary scrambling for the phone before the glass door even closed. They were nervous. Gary's reaction to the landscaping request confirmed it. Elias had thrown a stone into the dark, and he had heard it hit something hollow. The 10th business day arrived with the quiet inevitability of a tax deadline. Elias sat at his desk, his calendar marked with a single red circle. By 5:00 p.m., the association was legally required to produce the records. At 4:42 p.m., an email chimed. It was from Gary Miller. Attached was a PDF letter, not from the management company, but from the association's legal counsel. Elias opened it, his cursor hovering over the text as he parsed the legalese. Request for inspection of official records. Dear Mr. Thorne, the Board of Directors has reviewed your request regarding the financial records of Greenview Landscaping Solutions. After consultation with counsel, your request is hereby denied in part. The board has determined that the release of specific vendor contracts and detailed invoicing contains proprietary business information and trade secrets of our third-party vendors. Furthermore, given your recent hostile history with the board, this request is viewed as an attempt to gather information for the purpose of harassment. We have attached the standard end-of-year balance sheets for 21 on A1A in 22. These sufficiently demonstrate the financial health of the association. No further detailed records will be provided. Elias leaned back in his leather chair. A faint, dry smile touched his lips. Proprietary business information, he whispered. Since when is cutting grass a trade secret? He didn't reply to the email. Instead, he opened a spreadsheet titled Damages Calculator XLSX. He entered the start date, tomorrow. In the adjacent column, the formula calculated $50. State law was explicit. The penalty for denying access to official records was $50 per day, up to a maximum of $500 plus attorney's fees. But the money wasn't the point. The denial was the point. By refusing to show the invoices, the board had just converted a suspicion into a certainty. Innocent boards overwhelm you with paper to make you go away. Guilty boards hide everything. If they wouldn't show him the company on paper, he would go find the company on the street. The next morning, Elias traded his button-down shirt for a nondescript gray polo and a baseball cap. He pulled up the Public Business Registry on the Secretary of State's website. He searched for Greenview Landscaping Solutions. The filing was active. The registered agent was a Michael V.K. The principal address was listed as Suite 404, 1290 Industrial Parkway. Elias typed the address into his GPS. It was a 40-minute drive to the edge of the county, an area zoned for light industry and warehousing, perfect for a landscaping firm with heavy equipment, trucks, and mulch piles. He drove his sedan, a generic silver model that blended into traffic. When he arrived at 1290 Industrial Parkway, he didn't find a mulch pile. He didn't see trucks with trailers. He found a UPS store in a strip mall next to a faltering dry cleaner. Elias parked and walked in. He feigned interest in shipping rates, scanning the wall of mailboxes. Box 404 was small, barely large enough for a stack of envelopes, certainly not large enough to park a lawnmower. He returned to his car and pulled out a notebook. He noted the time and the location. He took a photo of the strip mall facade. Greenview Landscaping had no physical office, no depot, and likely no employees. Yet, according to the annual budget summaries the HOA sent out to all homeowners, the community paid this company $180,000 a year for common area maintenance. He sat in the idling car, the air conditioning fighting the midday heat. He recalled the registered agent's initials. Michael V.K. He pulled out his phone and searched Patricia Vance's social media. Her profile was locked, but her husband's wasn't. He scrolled back 3 years to a Thanksgiving photo. The caption read, "Great dinner with the in-laws. Thanks to Mike and Kathy for hosting." Tagged in the photo was Michael Vance Kramer, Patricia's brother-in-law. The loop closed with a satisfying click. Patricia was funneling community funds to a shell company owned by her family and using the privacy excuse to hide the paper trail. Elias put the car in gear. He wasn't just fighting a tint violation anymore. He was holding the tail of a very large, very ugly rat. He needed a bigger trap. It was time to call Marcus Sterling. Marcus Sterling did not have an office in a strip mall. His firm occupied the 34th floor of a glass tower downtown, overlooking the city skyline. The conference room smelled of polished mahogany and expensive leather. Elias laid his findings. On the table, the photo of the UPS store mailbox, the printout of the corporate registry, the family photo connecting Patricia to the registered agent, and the denial letter from the HOA board. Sterling, a man in a bespoke Navy suit who moved with the predatory grace of a shark in open water, picked up the denial letter. He read it, then chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. "They claimed trade secrets for a landscaping contract?" Sterling asked, tossing the paper back onto the table. "That's adorable. They're used to bullying homeowners who can't afford a retainer. They have no idea who they just poked." "I don't want a settlement," Elias said calmly. "I want the books." You'll get them, Sterling promised. We're going to file a writ of mandamus to compel production of records. And since they mentioned harassment in their cease and desist, we're going to subpoena the communication logs between board members to prove malice. We'll shake the tree and see what falls out. 3 weeks later, the tree didn't just shake, it collapsed. Faced with a lawsuit that would expose them to personal liability, the HOA's insurance carrier forced the board's hand. The Vance, Miller and Associates lawyer, realizing he was out of his depth against Sterling's firm, capitulated. The delivery arrived at Elias's house on a rainy Tuesday. 4 bankers' boxes filled with 5 years of financial records, invoices, and contracts. They had tried to bury him in paper, assuming an old man would get tired of reading. They were wrong. This was Elias's playground. He transformed his dining room into a war room. He set up a folding table to hold the overflow. He organized the documents by fiscal year, then by vendor. He brewed a pot of strong black coffee and began the audit. For 3 days, Elias lived inside the numbers. He built a master spreadsheet, entering every invoice from Greenview Landscaping. On the second night at 2:00 a.m., he found the pattern. He held up an invoice dated February 14th of the previous year. Invoice number 4402, seasonal mulch application. Common areas A, B, and C. Cost, $12,500. Elias cross-referenced this with the community newsletter from that month. There was no mention of mulching. He then checked the historical weather data for that week. It had rained 5 inches in 3 days. No landscaping crew in the world would lay mulch in a deluge. It would wash away before it settled. He dug deeper. He found invoices for palm tree pruning in October. Invoice number 4899, pruning of 45 royal palms along the perimeter wall, cost $4,500. Elias walked to his window and looked at the perimeter wall. He knew those trees. He had counted them on his morning walks. There were only 32 palms. They were billing for 13 phantom trees every single year. Then came the irrigation repairs. Invoice number 5100, replacement of main pump, north sector. Invoice number 5210, replacement of main pump, north sector. The invoices were dated 6 weeks apart. Industrial pumps don't fail every 6 weeks. And the serial numbers listed on the invoices, they were identical. They had billed the association twice for the same part. Elias sat back, rubbing his tired eyes. The scale of it was staggering. It wasn't just skimming off the top, it was systematic looting. Over the last 4 years, Greenview Landscaping, the company owned by Patricia's brother-in-law, had overbilled the community by nearly $200,000. They were draining the reserve fund, the money meant for roof repairs and road repaving, and funneling it into a UPS box in an industrial park. Elias picked up his phone and took a picture of the duplicate pump invoices. He texted it to Sterling with a simple caption, "I found the smoking gun." But Patricia Vance wasn't done yet. She didn't know Elias had the records. She only knew he was a problem. And while Elias was looking at the past, Patricia was plotting for the immediate future. She was about to make a move that would force Elias to look away from the books and look at his own front door. The blow didn't come with a shout or a confrontation in the street. It came with the silent, bureaucratic thud of a recorded document. Elias was in his study, cross-referencing the duplicate pump invoices, when his phone buzzed. It was a notification from the county clerk's automated alert system, a service he had subscribed to on the day he bought the house. It was a simple tool meant to alert homeowners to deed fraud, but today it delivered a declaration of war. Alert, new encumbrance recorded against parcel ID number 0944211. Type, claim of lien. Elias froze. He clicked the link, logging into the county portal. There, digitized in stark black and white, was the document filed that very morning at 8:03 a.m. Claim of lien, grantor, Elias Thorne, and grantee, Oakwood Heritage Homeowners Association. Amount was £1,850. The breakdown was listed in an attached exhibit. Unpaid violation fines, window tint, $1,000 in, capped at statutory max. Administrative fees, $150. Legal collection costs, $700. Patricia Vance had done it. She had placed a legal shackle on his home. A lien meant he couldn't sell, couldn't refinance, and if the debt remained unpaid, the association could initiate foreclosure proceedings. She was threatening to take a $500,000 asset over a window tint dispute. Elias stared at the screen. His heart rate didn't spike. Instead, a cold clarity washed over him. He understood the strategy. This was an intimidation tactic designed to crush the spirit. Most people terrified of losing their home would write the check just to make the nightmare end. But Patricia had made a critical calculation error. She had assumed the debt was valid. Elias picked up the phone and dialed Marcus Sterling's direct line. "She filed it," Elias said the moment the lawyer picked up. "The lien?" Sterling's voice was sharp. "Recorded this morning, 1,150. There was a pause on the line, followed by a sound that could only be described as a satisfied exhale. "Elias," Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave, "she just handed us the case on a silver platter. By filing a lien based on a violation that was legally estopped, she has committed slander of title. In our state, that doesn't just invalidate the lien. It opens the door for punitive damages. She's no longer protected by the business judgment rule. This is now malicious action. She wants to foreclose," Elias noted. "Let her try. We're going to file a quiet title action immediately," Sterling replied. "But more importantly, this gives us the leverage for the deposition. We need to get her under oath before we reveal the embezzlement. We need her to double down on her competence and her strict adherence to the rules. I want her to brag about how closely she watches the neighborhood. So when we show her the fake landscaping invoices..." "Exactly," Sterling finished the thought. "She can't claim ignorance if she just spent an hour testifying about what a perfectionist she is." Elias hung up. He walked to the front window. The afternoon sun was hitting the glass, the same glass that had started this entire war. Across the street, Patricia was getting into her car. She looked towards his house. Even from this distance, Elias could feel the smugness radiating off her. She thought she had him cornered. She thought he was scrambling to find his checkbook. Elias went back to his desk. He didn't write a check. He opened the file labeled Evidence, General Assembly. He printed the claim of lien and stapled it to the top of the pile containing the ghost landscaping invoices. "You wanted my house, Patricia," Elias said to the empty room. "Now you're going to lose yours." The timeline was set. The deposition was scheduled for next Tuesday. It would be the first time Patricia Vance would have to answer questions in a room where she couldn't bang a gavel to silence the opposition. The conference room at Sterling's law firm was freezing, a tactical choice meant to keep witnesses uncomfortable. A video camera was set up on a tripod, its red light blinking a silent, unblinking record of the proceedings. Patricia Vance sat at the head of the table, flanked by the association's attorney, a man named Mr. Henderson who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Next to Patricia sat the HOA treasurer, Bob Jenkins, a nervous man who kept wiping his palms on his trousers. Elias sat in the corner, silent, his face a mask of polite interest. He wasn't there to speak. He was there to watch. "Please state your name and position for the record," Marcus Sterling said. He didn't look up from his legal pad. "Patricia Vance, president of the Oakwood Heritage Homeowners Association," she said, her voice clipped. She adjusted her silk scarf, projecting an air of annoyed superiority. "I really don't see why this is necessary. Mr. Thorne is in violation. The lien is valid. This is a waste of community funds." "We'll get to the lien shortly, Ms. Vance," Sterling said, finally looking up. His smile was predatory. "First, I need to understand how you run the board. You would describe yourself as hands-on?" "Absolutely," Patricia replied. "I take my fiduciary duty very seriously. Nothing happens in Oakwood Heritage without my review. I check the property lines, the architectural requests, and the vendor performance personally." "So you read the contracts?" Sterling asked. "Every single line." "And the invoices? Do you verify that work is completed before authorizing payment?" "I don't sign a check unless I've seen the work with my own eyes," Patricia declared, leaning into the microphone. "Unlike some residents, I care about where our money goes." Sterling nodded slowly. He had what he needed. She was on the record claiming total control and perfect oversight. There was no "I didn't know" defense available to her now. Sterling reached into a box beside him. He pulled out a document, slid it across the polished table, and waited. Exhibit A, Sterling announced. This is invoice number 44402 from Greenview Landscaping, dated February 14th of last year. $12,500 for mulch application. You signed the check for this? Patricia glanced at it. Yes, we mulch the common areas annually, standard maintenance. Miss Vance, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do you recall the weather on the week of February 14th? Patricia frowned. I don't keep a weather diary. Sterling slid another paper across. This is the National Weather Service report for that week. It rained 5 inches in 3 days. A tropical depression was passing through. Are you telling me under oath that you watched a landscaping crew lay $12,000 worth of mulch in the middle of a flood? Patricia froze. The room went dead silent. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to roar. Perhaps the date on the invoice was administrative. They might have done the work later, she stammered. Interesting theory, Sterling said. He didn't let up. He slid another photo across the table. Exhibit B invoice for pruning 45 royal palms. Can you tell me where the extra 13 palm trees are located, Miss Vance? Because the survey, which you claim to know by heart, shows only 32. Bob Jenkins, the treasurer, made a small choking sound. He reached for his water glass, his hand trembling so badly the water sloshed over the rim. And finally, Sterling said, dropping the heavy binder on the table with a thud that made everyone jump. We have the corporate registration for Greenview Landscaping. Registered agent, Michael Vance Kramer, your brother-in-law. Patricia's face drained of color. The arrogance vanished, replaced by the hollow look of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. She looked at her attorney, but when Mr. Henderson was staring at the ceiling, distancing himself from the radioactive fallout. Ms. Vance, Sterling said, leaning forward, you just testified that you review every contract and verify every invoice. So either you are incompetent and approve payments for phantom trees and washed away mulch, or you are complicit in a scheme to defraud the homeowners of Oakwood Heritage. Which is it? I assert my Fifth Amendment right, Patricia whispered. This is a civil deposition, Ms. Vance, not a criminal trial. Yet, Sterling said, his voice like ice. But don't worry, we'll be presenting this evidence to the entire community at the General Assembly next week. And I imagine the state attorney will be very interested in the transcript of this meeting. Sterling stood up and buttoned his jacket. We're done here. Elias stood as well. He met Patricia's gaze. There was no triumph in his eyes, only the cold, hard weight of accountability. She looked away. The trap hadn't just snapped, it had shattered the bone. The Oakwood Heritage Community Center was designed to hold 100 people comfortably. Tonight, nearly 200 residents were crammed inside, standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The rumor mill, fueled by the sudden presence of a mysterious forensic audit, had done its work. Patricia Vance sat at the head table on the elevated stage. She looked pale, her usual ironclad composure fracturing under the weight of the staring crowd. Beside her, the rest of the board looked like men awaiting a firing squad. Order! Patricia banged her gavel, the sound cracking sharply through the murmuring crowd. We will proceed with the agenda. Item 1, approval of the minutes. Point of order! Elias's voice cut through the room. He didn't shout, he projected. He stood near the front, not in the audience chairs, but beside a portable projector screen he had set up earlier. Mr. Thorne, you are out of order, Patricia snapped, her voice shrill. This is the board's meeting. Sit down or I will have you removed. Actually, Marcus Sterling stepped out from the shadows of the side entrance, his suit immaculate. Under the bylaws, a special meeting can be convened by a petition of 20% of the membership. We have signatures from 65%. He held up a thick stack of papers. This is now a members' meeting, and Mr. Thorne has the floor. A wave of whispers rippled through the room. Patricia looked at the security guard, a retired cop that HOA hired for meetings, but he just crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. He wasn't getting involved in this. Elias connected his laptop to the projector. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen, massive and undeniable. For the past 6 months, Elias began, addressing his neighbors, I have been fined, threatened, and sued because of the tint on my windows. But while investigating that, I found something else. I found where your dues are actually going. He clicked a remote. The screen changed to a split image. The invoice for the Royal Palm pruning on the left, and a drone photo of the neighborhood perimeter on the right. This invoice shows we paid $4,500 to prune 45 trees, Elias said. The photo shows we only have 32. We have been paying to prune 13 invisible trees for 5 years. Gasps erupted from the front row. Elias clicked again. Here is an invoice for 12,000 of mulch laid during a tropical storm. Here are duplicate invoices for pump repairs that never happened. He turned to look at the board. And here is the corporate registration for the vendor, Greenview Landscaping. It is owned by Michael Vance Kramer. The room exploded. People were on their feet. That's her brother-in-law, someone shouted. They're stealing our money. Patricia stood up, knocking her chair over. This is slander. This is a conspiracy. It's not slander if it's true, Patricia, Sterling said, stepping up to the microphone. And it's not a conspiracy, it's racketeering. We have already filed a civil suit for damages. But given the scale of the theft, exceeding $200,000, we had a legal obligation to contact other authorities. As if on cue, the double doors at the back of the room opened. 2 officers from the Economic Crimes Unit walked in, followed by a detective Elias had met with earlier that week. The detective walked up to the stage. Patricia Vance, Robert Jenkins, I need you to step down from the stage. We have warrants for your arrest regarding charges of grand larceny and scheme to defraud. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the click of handcuffs. Patricia didn't scream. She didn't fight. She looked small, stripped of her gavel and her power. As they let her out, she scanned the room, looking for an ally, but found only the angry, betrayed faces of the neighbors she had bullied for years. Elias watched them go. He didn't smile. He felt a heavy exhaustion, but also a profound sense of relief. The meeting continued without the board. An emergency interim committee was formed on the spot. A motion was made to vacate all fines and liens issued under the Vance administration pending a full external audit. It passed unanimously. Later that night, Elias stood on his front porch. The patrol car was gone. The threat of foreclosure was gone. The lien had been dissolved. He looked at his bay windows. The moonlight reflected off the tint that was just a little too dark, a little too reflective. It wasn't just a window anymore. It was a monument. He went inside and locked the door. The neighborhood was quiet again, but this time, it was the peace of a community that had taken its home back.